Hey folks, it's Chris with the Human Project. I'm really excited about this episode because we're going to start a new series on emotions. Love talking about emotions. And it's gonna be interesting because it's Mark and I, two dudes, talking about emotions. So where we're starting off is how emotions are signals for us, how they reveal something that's actually happening deep inside us. And then what we'll do is we'll build on top of that with how do we talk about emotions and build our vocabulary. And then from there, what we'll talk about is how do we leverage emotions in community? And then how do we help regulate our emotions? How do we help raise them to where they're healthy and we're taking appropriate action as a result of them? Excited to talk about this and hear what you all think. Thanks. Hey Mark.
Hey Chris.
How's it going today?
I'm feeling joyful. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Joyful. I'm feeling jubilant.
Jubilant. Positively chuffed.
Chuffed. So we're using different emotion words because we're going to talk about emotions today.
A little cheesy, but that's all right.
Yeah, super cheesy.
Yeah.
But what else would people expect from us?
They wouldn't know us.
That's very true. So I just want to make sure that we're calling out the weird, interesting thing for some people is that two dudes are going to talk about emotion.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, bro.
Yeah, totally. I feel good.
I feel stoked.
Totally.
I think it's important for us to talk about emotions. And I think we're hitting our after lunch.
Yes.
Re-energized.
Bring the energy.
Yeah. But I think it's important for us to talk about emotions because we all have them.
What?
I know.
That might be the first news flash.
Yeah. We're going to have lots of revelations happening throughout this podcast. That's the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Second one is guys experience emotions too.
Also, true story.
And I think it's important for us to spend time talking about the healthy side of emotions as well as the unhealthy side of emotions. Because I think for a lot of times people growing up, they've experienced emotions as either you feel all the feels or you feel none of the feels.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about the balance there. And this is going to be an overview of emotions. And then we're going to dive into more specifics later on, like how do you build an emotional vocabulary? How do you experience emotions in relationship and in community? And then what do you do about emotions? How do you help ensure that you're treating them healthily, in a healthy way?
There we go.
Yeah, there you go. We'll go with that one.
Right.
So what comes to mind when I mention the word emotions? Like what do you think about there?
Well,
What's your
now
response?
I think about specific emotional words. That's why I started saying some when we were starting the episode, like chuffed, for example, which is a fun British emotional word. But yeah, I go where you were just going too. Some of us were kind of forbidden or forbid ourselves from feeling emotions. And some of us were encouraged to feel them all and do whatever they say. What my experience was is that some emotions were bad and some emotions were allowed or acceptable or good. And so if I felt an emotion that was in the bad category, then I was doing something bad and unhelpful. But if it was something in the good category, then I was good.
So there's like a judgment attached to different emotions.
Exactly. Or an amount of an emotion even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like the depth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the height even. Because it can be what we would typically label as a good emotion, right? You can have joy, but only this much joy, for example.
Okay.
Sometimes that's
interesting.
how you can experience those limits.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's interesting that there's judgment attached because I think I see that culturally too. Like when we talk, people, you're expecting like, how are you? The classic, how are you?
The right answer is...
The right answer is, I'm good.
Fine.
Or I'm busy.
Or that's totally acceptable, yes.
Yeah, which isn't an emotion at all. We'll talk about that in a different podcast series. About busyness, my goodness.
Oh, I'm too busy for that, sorry.
You actually are.
I am. Let's talk.
But yeah, we don't really care what other people are experiencing emotions for. We expect the pleasantries of how are you, when somebody could be really wrestling with something or going through something really difficult.
Yeah.
But if you don't get a good, or you say, oh man, I'm struggling, it's almost like an awkward thing because you didn't actually expect a real emotion.
Sometimes we'll even react to like, how are you doing? Horribly. Oh, that's good to hear. What? Oh, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. Yeah, because you're not actually listening, which that's a whole different topic.
That's a different problem.
We'll get into. But emotions, yeah, you're expected to be good all the time.
Right.
And it's just not how life works.
Right.
I think when we hear the good, or always the expectation of good, nobody's actually feeling that unless they're faking it.
Yeah.
And so
all the time, certainly, at least. Like, always be good. You're like, really?
Right.
What are you on?
Yeah. Well, I think of people that, like my wife, Victoria, has a wonderful disposition like 99% of the time. Ask her how she's doing, and she will always say good, which is a funny running joke of ours, but then I'll actually wait for the real emotion.
Okay.
And that's been a learned skill. But I think all of us experience difficult things or other emotions at the time. So I think that's one of the answers for the question I'm about to ask. Answering my question before I even ask my question.
That's how smart you are. Awesome.
Don't know about that. But why talk about emotions?
Yeah.
Why is it important for us to bring them to the surface, to dive into them, talk about them, and even wrestle with them a little bit?
Yeah. And just to kind of empathize with that question a little bit, I can understand, especially in business environments or for some people, the way that they're wired are going to find that emotions are that they found them a lot less helpful in their lives. In some cases dangerous, but we'll come back to that one, I'm sure, later. But, if I'm trying to solve a math problem, emotions probably aren't going to help me. Or I'm trying to solve an engineering problem, emotions may not help me as much. So, I can see how this can be a challenging question for some people. Why would I want to talk about it? And so I'm just trying to kind of connect with that and go, I get that.
Yeah.
It can seem like it's a distraction. And many times, even in Christian circles, we'll hear like the heart is deceitfully wicked. And that's connected with like, don't have emotions or don't pay attention to emotions. And emotions can be painted as the bad guy, basically. Yeah. We don't want to be driven by our emotions, which to many of us sounds like don't have them or ignore them entirely or stuff them down or something like that. And that's a disservice, I think, to emotions.
Like if we're not driven by them, we have to park them.
Right. Then they serve no purpose. That seems like an overextension to me. I would go back to what's the design of emotions? What did God intend when he made us with emotions?
Yeah.
And even let's just check and make sure, did he intend for us to have emotions? And I think we can just very simply read Jesus experiencing, having emotions, expressing emotions to go, yes, he did. He intended for us to have emotions, so why?
The shortest Bible verse to memorize, Jesus wept.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's him expressing a deep emotion that he was feeling at the time of a really good friend of his who had just died.
Yep.
So I think it's important for us to talk about because we tend to mishandle them. And we're, culturally, both in the broader culture and in the Christian community, we tend to mishandle emotions. And so we're missing something of what God intended for us. Yeah.
I think that's a really important call out. Before we go there, I want to pull back, because you said in the business environment, which is an area we've worked in a lot. Yeah. And I mean, most people here will have a job and something they're interacting with other human beings. I like to say that there's this imagined like metal detector for emotions at the door of companies that we step into that, and all of a sudden we're expected to leave our emotions at the door. We've had managers and leaders say this to us. Like, literally. Oh yeah, we tell people to leave their emotions at home. I'm like, well, you're missing all kinds of opportunities to bring creativity and all of that into the space.
Not to mention it's not possible.
Right.
By the way, actually not have emotions. You might not deal with them healthily, but you're going to have them.
I turn into a robot at work. But I think the broader perspective of that, of not being able to deal with them in a healthy way. I had one of my friends tell me they stopped going to a church for a long time because it was expected that you had to show up there on Sunday morning with your Sunday best. Not just like
all the time
dress, but your emotions. Like you came smiling, happy to serve the Lord, happy to be with the community, which, there's an element of that. But he felt like that was the only option that they were able to have.
So in order to do that, he'd have to be ingenuine sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So when we think about emotions and we think about how they're healthy for us, I'm curious what comes to mind for you there.
I think the best thing I've heard about emotions is the most helpful for me has been that they're a signal. They're an indicator.
A signal?
A signal, yeah.
Okay.
They're telling us something. Kind of like the indicator lights maybe on our dashboard of a car. And
check engine light.
Check engine light.
Check emotion light on.
Like, I left that at home, right? I gotta leave that at the door or whatever the case.
You left your engine at home?
I'm gonna leave the check engine light at home. In this analogy, that would be what we'd be saying. So, that's an emotion. I'm just not gonna pay attention to that. But it's trying to tell us something. And if I hit my curiosity button, my question mark, thank you. If I go all question mark on it, I'm going, what is that trying to tell me? There's a reason why I'm feeling that. What is that reason? What's behind that? I think that is super helpful. It's also very challenging. I mean, I'm not suggesting that's a simple thing to try and understand and answer. And yet I think there's something missing if we don't ask those questions too. What about you? Why do you find value in talking about emotions, even more so as a male?
Yeah, I think that's a big factor as a signal, because it's like, what's going on there? Like, for the longest time, like anytime I got hurt, like emotionally hurt, like something, like I'm like, ow, that did not feel good mentally or emotionally, I would respond with anger. And it wasn't until it was like deep, deep, piercing pain that I would actually allow myself to experience hurt, because I had no other choice.
Okay.
Like anger was more like a veneer
that
I wore on the surface. And thankfully I've been able to deal with that for the most part. And it was interesting, like going back at that, like, okay, why am I angry? What's upsetting about the situation? And I was able to see, like, why is that? And then I was able to work through it from there. Yeah, I really like the check engine light analogy, because it's telling you something's going on that's worth a look at. So,
It doesn't have to be negative either. We're obviously talking about it in some ways as if that is the case. But it also can be amazing. Like I woke up yesterday, was taking a walk in the morning. It was a beautiful sunshine day, and I'm like, I just felt great. I was feeling joy.
Yeah.
It's the same question. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And to take it just a little further of that, like if I allow myself to feel whatever the emotion is, joy or anger or fear, I first just start with it's a signal, so I'm going to allow myself to feel it. It's not intrinsically in and of itself good or bad. It just is a signal. What is it trying to tell me? Why is that here? So I can feel it, and then I can consider it. And in the example of joy, just so we're not just talking about, seemingly negative things.
Sure.
In the example of joy, I was able to recognize that I was really grateful for a few things. But I hadn't quite connected the dots to realize that's what was going on with me. I was just so grateful for the relationship I have with Christine. I was so grateful that the sun was shining that day, and it was a clear blue sky, and I got to see God's creation that day. And because I allowed myself to recognize, I just kept walking, but I stopped mentally, and I allowed myself to feel the joy and go, what is that about? Then I was able to be very explicitly grateful and thankful to God. And then when I got back from my walk, to be grateful to Christine too, and just express that. So that was because I allowed myself to feel it instead of going, cool, I feel happy. Whatever. I'm just going to feel happy. What's in that? And the same thing can be true, of course, like you're saying about negative ones too. What's underneath this?
I'm curious what you'd say to our listeners that are either on one side of the continuum or the other of emotions are bad, I try and bury them, or I need to feel all the emotions. Sounds like for those that are in the emotions are bad, we're inviting them into a perspective of looking at them as signals.
Yeah.
What about the people that are feeling all the feels?
Yeah.
Like,
So just like diving in, and whatever happens, whatever I feel, I'm just going to fully express.
Yeah.
Just let it
yep.
come out, basically.
Because that's probably not on the border of optimal.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be harmful, for example, to the people around you if you're just letting it all, like, I feel angry, so I'm going to what? Like hurt somebody, in an extreme case. That I think I would say allow ourselves to feel and to consider the emotional signals. So for the people who are on the first part of the continuum you're talking about, where we're not allowed to feel it, start by allowing yourself to feel it, if you will, like sit in it. And for the people on that extreme of, or toward the extreme of, let's just, whatever I feel I'm just going to fully do, is how about consider? You're great, you're feeling it. What about considering why it's there and what's going on with that? What would you say to the people on those two ends?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. This it's pulling together, and I'm guessing this might do the same for a lot of people. It's pulling together childhood.
Yeah.
Like my dad, steady Eddie, doesn't feel a lot of things unless it's angry at the Reds losing or the Bengals losing, which was always all growing up was the Bengals losing. Yes, Derek, I know. And my mom, who is the other end of the continuum, who's feeling all the feels and like you wore emotions on her sleeve is the phrase you hear. And it's interesting, like I feel like I'm kind of grounded in between both of those extremes because I've been able to see the detriments and positives of each one. And I love just the call to center, I think is what we're asking people. Like, surprise, surprise, we're imagining something on a continuum and there's balance somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think the best place to start is always like, what did God experience with emotions? And we've talked about this in our genuineness episode, balancing that with faith. If you want to check that out, check out I think it's our 5th episode.
Yes.
Yeah. Loved the conversation we had there. But I think the call is experience it.
Yeah.
And then not just stop there, but dive into what's this telling me?
Yeah.
And in future episodes, I think where we're going is how do we become more aware of those emotions? Right. So first, the thing we're asking people to do here is pause and just be aware.
Yeah.
The second episode, we're going to build our emotional vocabulary. We're going to talk about different depths and different gradients and different ways of looking at emotions. That's also a great spot to help build your awareness. And then we're going to talk about community. Surprise, surprise. We love talking about community.
A theme.
Yeah. There's so much power in community and having other perspectives from other people. But we're going to dive into that and talk about what do emotions look like in community. So you're not in that, I have to show up in my best and only be smiling Sunday morning at church. And then I think what would be helpful and healthy for our listeners is what does that emotional balance look like of bringing it back to healthy using all those things that we talked about? And then what goals do we have for emotions? That's a weird thing to think about.
Yeah, you don't usually hear people talk about that as a goal for achieving something maybe.
Yeah.
But a goal for emotions, that's interesting.
Right. So I think that's the intro. That's where we're going. So the invitation is look and see what's happening with your emotions. What is it asking you to think about? What signal is there for you? And then we'll build on top of that with future episodes.
And I just want to encourage you to lean into this because exploring this territory is rich. So some of the deepest healing that I've seen in my life and in the lives of people around me is connected to this exact topic and these approaches here of understanding what's going on. In a sense, emotions, I think, are a way of understanding what's going on underneath the surface of our lives. And that is a spot that God wants to work in.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're invited into.
Yeah. Love it. Perfect.
Let's do it.
All right, let's explore. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in today. This podcast is made possible by myself, Chris Conlin, Mark Wavle, and our lead editor, Derek Donley. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit. Most of what we do is free because of your generous support. Thank you for joining us on our mission to bring 1 million lives closer to fullness in God's design. To support us financially or to learn more, visit humanproject.us.